Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go.
Courtney Lohman and Natalie Fulton are here to join with me today to talk about hunger pains, managing food and beverage today. And I reached out to them. I'm going to introduce you to them in a second, but I reached out to them because I saw them on the Site Global Conference agenda from February. And I'm like, oh, let's recreate this session on eating at a meeting. So here we are. Courtney, right there in the middle, is a sustainability and social impact thought leader, helping businesses and planners realize the ease of implementing sustainability. Wait a minute, there's ease in implementing sustainability, Courtney?
There is. It's a big secret.
Wow. Oh my gosh, apparently it is, yes. And then Natalie on the far side from me, she is with Tourism New Zealand, and she connects North American incentive market with partners in New Zealand. She has a passion for food and beverage. She previously worked for companies including PRA, Warner Brothers, Hyatt, the House of Blues, and has a BS from Cornell. She views eating differently now that she has a 2-year-old. I am sure that you do. Let's just jump in. I mean, we were talking just before we got on the show here about, your segment at your educational segment at Site Global, and you were talking about what the biggest challenges were. And somebody brought up, and really ties into one of my planners who is paying $275 for a gallon of coffee. But besides coffee conversation, let's just jump in. What were some of the other hunger pains that you found planners had with food and beverage right now across the board?
Yeah. So I know you kind of jumping into the coffee conversation and the cost of coffee. And so obviously the cost of beverage is a big conversation, and the decision to what do you take things out of your menus to accommodate the cost. And so there had been this big conversation surrounding the decision to whether or not provide coffee in the morning of a conference, something really basic. And how does that affect the energy of the group during the day? And we found most of our discussion actually talked about this idea that not having a coffee in the morning was a huge thing that took away from the group.
I mean, not only for the fact that people are used to having coffee at an event provided for them, but I think it also, Courtney, I think you're good at educating too, really talking about, we have to educate our attendees on what the plan is, right?
And yeah. I always take it to that. How are you telling your story? And your story can be many things, right? But where and how are you communicating that? How are you preparing people? How are you helping them anticipate what they're going to need? So I'm an individual that is pretty much hungry 24 hours a day. I mean, I wake up in the morning starving. That's like all I think about all day, right? Is when am I going to eat next? So I naturally travel with different types of snacks with me, like, easy sort of healthy prepackaged things that give me some energy. So if I arrive someplace and I haven't been communicated to, and I know I need something quick in the morning, I usually have a go-to. But a lot of people don't travel in that sense, right? So what is that they should prepare for? Should they be packing something a little bit extra? Like, how are you explaining to them up front, kind of prepared? In the mornings, you're going to have, up until this time, nothing's going to be served to you, which is okay. We all understand where the budget constrictions are. And in many ways, I think the AM skip is the easiest choice, right? But then how do you engage them in other ways? How do you talk with your sponsors? If you're one of those types of events that bring in sponsors, how do you engage your sponsors? Maybe there's little, breakfast happy hours that sponsors want to coordinate and invite people to. I think there's just a multitude of ways, right, that we can engage differently with people so that they know how to prepare, and then maybe what other experiences could be set up.
Yeah, I think generally the consensus was it's totally fine to eliminate, and that's a great point, Courtney, that AM break being kind of the easiest thing to eliminate, but then as the planner, be proactive about what you need to provide the group with in terms of options. And we talked a little bit about, depending on what city you're in, a coffee shop could be nowhere to be found, or you could be 20 minutes away, depending on the size of the hotel. So make sure you've thought through those elements and communicated to the group so that they know where they can purchase or bring along with them ahead of time. Because I think there are lots of ways to get around it. You just have to kind of own and lean into the fact that you've eliminated it so that you can then create other experiences.
Yeah. Well, and I think it also comes down to timing too, because I don't know why this popped in, but the Mandalay Bay Starbucks, right? That one that's being redesigned, and then they had small kiosks around the hotel to accommodate when that one was being redesigned. But those lines get long at conventions, at hotels and convention centers. And so you also have to say, because am I a last minute person that shows up to the event last, or the last minute to grab a breakfast bite before I go into the general session or the breakout rooms? And hey, I was expecting to be able to grab a muffin or a coffee on the way in. I actually need to plan another 15 minutes to make sure I have something. So I think that communication is key.
I was going to say too, it's also like unique opportunities that, how do you engage with other things happening in those areas? So if you're in like a New York or a DC or in Atlanta or Chicago, right? You could put together a really interesting map that talks about, here are the breakfast places, coffee shops, etc., that are near the hotel. Get up in the morning, get in a little bit of a 10-minute walk, support a local business. Here's what's going on. Like, it kind of gives that sense of cultural experience within the destination as well. And it encourages your attendees to get a little bit of fresh air before maybe they spend the next 5 to 6 hours inside the building, right? Mm-hmm. Like, there's attendees, I think, that really appreciate those things, but they don't necessarily have the time to do that research on their own. So there's a lot of unique ways to engage. So how do you look at that from a different lens and then put something unique together that feels really fun? Even if only, call it 20% of your attendees go, think about how they're going to provide that kind of feedback and say, this was so cool. I really appreciated the information up front. I got to experience this, XYZ coffee shop, what have you.
Well, and that's really interesting because I'm thinking of my own experience recently in New York for Site Global. So I represent New Zealand, and I had an opportunity to host some planners for a little breakfast, and I wanted to provide New Zealand coffee and like sausage rolls to kind of represent the country. But obviously, bringing that into a hotel would be really challenging. There'd be costs involved. Transporting that when I'm by myself is challenging. So the idea that I could have potentially invited some planners to come, because there actually is a small coffee shop that was near the hotel that does provide that stuff, that I could have then invited people to the coffee shop and just had a little chat, and that would have been really nice and probably really memorable for the planners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know that's a great way for a company to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. If I'm an attendee, that's my morning experience that I want, right? Like that, I'd rather do that than be in the foyer where I'm spending my entire day anyway. I would love that opportunity for a short little walk, sit with some people, feel like it's just a casual kind of way to start your day. I mean, to me, that's a very energizing way to begin anyway. So.
Well, and I like that idea too, to pitching that to your vendor partners like you, Natalie, that are there, to saying, hey, we're not providing breakfast. So this is your opportunity to invite somebody or, do something different. And it's actually, and you're not asking them for money, right? Because you're giving, hey, here's some ideas for you. And you're both destination management, and I'm actually a former DMC, employee long time ago. But I mean, that's a way to bring that about, right? And find some unique ways to utilize. And I love the city, and I love pointing out the pieces to the city. And maybe if you did that in advance, you could create a scavenger hunt. Hey, go check out these different spots that offer these food and beverage. And I also tell CVBs when I'm talking to them, I'm like, do you know where the halal restaurants are, or the gluten-free bakeries, or, these, New Zealand coffee shops, right? Point those out. CVB, give those to your planners, right? So that your planners can then go get it. Because it gets people out to the city. Yeah. Because people don't leave their conference center or their hotel rooms very much.
And I think gone are the days of like being able to truly a big Yelper and all that kind of stuff, but I mean, even those apps sometimes are now losing some of their some of what you're looking for when you're going to and experience it.
Yeah. And then finding and some people aren't really big on exploring, really far outside of where they are, right? But and I brought up beforehand, it's like I had an event that went from Vegas to Orlando, and there wasn't any place to walk around really to go experience any food and beverage. So you have to learn to accommodate the differences in that. But hey, maybe it is really pushing hard to get a coffee sponsor to pay for that fee, right? But restocking coffee. This is a sustainability stat that Aurora Dawn Benton, do you all know her?
Yeah.
So she was like, she's come up with this term, prolifically problematic, and in some research that she's doing in the Pacific Northwest. And it's like coffee and creamers are like 2 of the top 10 things that are thrown away the most.
Right? Oh, I believe it.
Yeah. And at the price of coffee, then figure out something else to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, for sure. So were there other hunger pains that planners had that and or that you two see with your clients in planning food and beverage?
Yeah, I was going to say, I felt like the only other thing that really came up a lot in that specific conversation was cost, right? Natalie, would you say that was like the next big factor, which and I guess part of that right now is just going back to inflation and some of the other things, that we're seeing in our supply chains as a whole. I think in this like immediate sense, it's been really hard for planners to adjust to the cost. At least that's what I've seen. I've had, even into early this year, I've had planners that have still been restricted by 2019 budget numbers. So when you're looking at a number from that far back, and it hasn't just been one. It's not all of them, but it hasn't just been one, right? You're looking at numbers that are that far back and where we are now. I mean, that's a real challenge, and especially if you've got an international audience and you have to ensure you have the right variety of foods, and maybe you have to bring in some specialty items because you do have the international audience. I mean, you just stack so many things against yourself, and cost has become, I think, a big player in this moment. I'm not so sure I have like the world's best solutions for it.
Yeah, I think we talked a lot about the this kind of balancing of how do you get creative and watch costs, and maybe some of that. I know that we've heard some stories of hotels for big large hotels maybe offering limited menus to multiple groups in the same day so that they can save, and not or you're paying a premium if you want to customize that menu as a way to save costs. But then obviously now more than ever, there's a huge focus on personalizing and making sure that people are taking advantage of the local cuisine and showcasing these amazing, really innovative ways to display things. So how do you manage both of those things? And I think the answer that came up is that the more important thing is the customization and the personalization. There's got to be a way to be able to do that creatively, and let's find a way economically to do it. But there is an importance for that.
Yeah. Well, and it brings up a conversation I had yesterday. I ran into my friend Rebecca at the airport. She was coming and I was leaving, and she lives in Hawaii. And so she was talking, this is mind-boggling, that there are DMC partners that are charging $500 for a airport pickup now, and to take people 7 miles. And one of her clients is like, are you okay if you just take a cab? And because this is what I'm being charged. And she's like, because a cab was $45. And she's like, of course I'm going to take a cab. Right. But, and the one high end event venue that she works at a lot, the per person fee for a buffet was $425 for a buffet. And I'm like, she's like, I was like, my chin is on the ground because I'm like, who can afford that? But I'm like, if you're going to this 5-star or 7-star, if there exists, hotel, you're expecting to pay that. But where are you getting that money from? Not everybody has that money.
What else is suffering at the event because of it? We talked about, well, then you've got planners making the choice and they're eliminating breakfast or coffee in the morning. What else is suffering? I mean, I know it opens a whole other can of worms, and today we focus on food and beverage, but it's really then the entire event design and the attendee experience that's ultimately suffering. And the big hit is I believe at food and beverage, and it's a place that we always want to make sure we're delivering on. And I just think that when I pull back and think about that larger event design, it's really sad to see that we're starting to lose so much else because of it, right? Because so many of these costs are soaring, and we know we need to be in a good place. If we don't have, if people aren't hydrated and they aren't fed good foods that nourish them, then we're not getting their best at a meeting anyway, right? And so we have to really start to make tough decisions in that planner space to say, I have to feed them good food. What else am I going to cut? And I think that's one of the other real unfortunate places of where we've landed now.
Yeah, I think it's important going into anything. I mean, this is, most people realize this is knowing the priorities and what you want to accomplish out of the program. And if people are going to be in sessions all day long, you have to think about their ability to pay attention and stay focused throughout the day. And food plays a huge part of that. And I think it's funny that we did talk about coffee all morning, because obviously that's not always the best solution for things. There are other nutritious ways of getting energizing, but I think it's hard because you also want to make sure you are thinking about the messaging, because in some cases, maybe you are spending money on a lavish, elaborate buffet, but maybe your attendees don't really need that. Maybe there are some simple things you can do and focus on and put your energies there and your resources there versus, providing a giant grazing board where some things going to get wasted. Maybe showcase 3 really nice things from the destination, and that's a way to get around some of the costs, perhaps.
Yeah, and it's having conversations with partners.
And I was going to say too, I don't know if either of you are seeing much of this, but are we collecting different information these days? A lot of times we talk about how we're trying to create experiences that feel personalized, right? How much data are we creating? What are we really capturing in our registration systems? What are we really capturing in post-event surveys? How are we auditing ourselves on site to really try to find those key things? Because I agree with you, Natalie, maybe you can't. Maybe as that planner, you can really just focus in on a few key factors, and then that's all the food you need to put out, right? Now you've provided something that the group really enjoys, that you're feeding them well, they're feeling energized. It's a big win-win, right? But how do we know? I don't have, again, an answer, but I'm just wondering, are we getting better at data collection on front, data analyzation? I think I made up a word on the back end, right? How are we doing there? And in that space, especially in this day and age where we need to watch the rising costs and personalize as much as possible.
And I wonder too, I'm planning another event for another organization, and we did created our C-vent, and we put the little dietary requests in there and asked for questions up front of what people wanted. But at the same time, I think some of that we were doing to tick a box, because I don't know how much of an impact it was going to have on the program design, because I don't even know we did it ahead of time enough in the program design to be able to react to it once I came back. And then, and I'm even thinking, I'm curious, I don't know the answer to this. Are there better questions to ask sometimes? Obviously we want to personalize things and we want to give people options, but how much power do we want to give the group? Because I think sometimes if you ask them what they want, you may get, I've had before events where I've got an event for 75 and I've got 65 different dietary requests. And some of that is personal preferences and things. And so where do you draw the line of offering customization to then what makes sense?
Yeah. 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 And when I teach it, I'm like, separate, because food allergies here in the States fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act and celiac and diabetes. I actually put it under that question, like, do you have any medical conditions that require you to eat a specific way? And then say, do you have any other dietary requests that you have? So that you're kind of separating those preferences and the medical needs from that. But it does get, cumbersome in doing that. But how do you, look at that menu, then sort them by, hey, I've got 5 vegans, I've got this. And can you eliminate that? Like one list I showed, somebody wrote that they were allergic to escargot. I'm like, we can easily eliminate escargot from our menu. So that person's a done deal, right? I'm like, I don't know how many chefs are going to put snail meat in their food, right? But it is really kind of understanding that. And the one client that went from Vegas to Orlando, we had 5 years of data of how many people, what percentage of people overall from their event came to each of the different food functions over the course of 5 years. And that's really important. That 1 year going to Orlando really jumped the exhibit hall that one time, but understanding that data is really important to designing that. And then also going back and this is kind of hard as a planner, especially if you don't have anybody focused on food and beverage for you, that you've just done the tick boxes and, hey, I picked these items. Did anybody eat the bagels? Did anybody eat the muffins? Right. And going into the back of the house, how much is that? It's getting donated or most likely thrown in the trash, which we need to stop that. But really doing data to the food and beverage, because we don't.
That's excellent point. The post, I think sometimes we focus on the pre and all the questions and we don't think about the post, and we don't think about recapping and getting with the hotel and your partners and finding out what really happened, and to then be able to the next year make a big.
Yeah. And to bring it full circle to Natalie, like when I talk about sustainability a lot and people ask me questions, where should I start with my sustainability? When they pretty much, maybe they've eliminated plastic bottles or something, right? And I'm like, have you done a food audit? I'm like, it's a food audit. I'm like, after every meal for your next program, every meal, just go into the back of house and see what food you have left over and start noting and looking for trends. Not only do you design better menus, I've done this myself years ago and learned a ton about a group that I planned for year after year after year. Not only do you pick better foods that people then eat and then you create less waste, you also save money. There is a ton of money saved when you don't throw out food. And I don't think people correlate that and really understand what comes with that, like more strategic thought process through planning. And so I'll sit in a room, you're doing more of one of my general kind of sustainability conversations. And when I get to food and beverage, I ask for a raise of hands. How many people have ever audited what food is left over after a meal? I think if I have 100 people in the room, like 2 people will put up their hand. Yeah. Right. So just there, for those that are listening, like just starting there is a huge place to help you with everything we've just talked about, right? Like whether you're making choices about eliminating, whether you're looking to save costs, how you're asking questions on the front end. Because I agree, we ask a lot of questions and we try to plan for it. And then we end up on the back end with all this extra stuff, right? We also end up with people that are, they'll make a comment on registration like, I eat very healthy. Yeah. That same person's the one taking 4 cookies, right? Like sometimes we cheat when we go to meetings. Like, it's okay,
Yeah. Well, and so that actually brings me to a thought. That kind of transitions nicely into, I was going to comment, that one thing I saw that was done really well, Site did a few years ago at their incentive summit at Beaver Creek, Park Hyatt that was there. An interesting thing about cost cutting and sustainability measures and at registration is when they asked you for your gala night entree selection. And they actually put the plant-based option forward as everyone's getting a roasted cauliflower entree. And if you want the meat option, that's an alternate. So you have to decide at registration. And it was really interesting to watch people in that moment haggle with themselves of like, am I going to be the healthy person and just go with the plant-based? And so there were lots of things happening. It was that whole kind of, I'm making a decision right now and I'm going to stick to it. And I think when you're asked that at registration, sometimes you decide to to be a little more adventurous. So people thought, oh, I'll go with the cauliflower, when maybe if they had been at the table at the dinner and the server had come around and asked them, they would have then gone for the steak. Yeah. But in that moment in registration, it was like this whole inner decision they were making with themselves. And then, of course, that goes into the conversation about other ways of being creative. The fact that they put the plant-based option as the front runner, I think a lot more people chose it instead of doing the meat. So I'm not a vegetarian, but in that moment, I was like, you know what? This is fun. Let's do it. It sounds delicious. Let's try it. And I went with it, and I was very happy with the choice. So I thought that was a really smart way of doing something.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was in the article, Meetings Today magazine, the April issue. It's Plant Forward, the case for Plant Forward, and default veg. That's how they actually do conferences. It's like, let everybody know, hey, we're doing this. Do you want to stick with this? Do you want the meat? And then do you have any other dietary needs that we need to take into consideration? And so it's actually asking them at the registration point as well. But I like the on-site, as long as a property can get the food that they need. That's one of the challenges that we have now is sourcing, right? So yeah, if you could do it at that point, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. But in both instances, communication was key. Like both of those examples, It's really important to communicate like, hey, we're going to go with this vegetarian meal as the front runner, and this is the why. If you want to choose something else, please let us know, right? Like get the buy-in through that communication.
Yeah. Because I've been at events and then heard third-party of events where they went ahead and did it all vegan, and people got up and left. Right?
Yeah.
They left the program because they wanted meat, an animal-based product. And so they, missed out on the connections that they could have at that lunch period. They went and spent more money, because the food was included in that. And you lost your audience.
Yeah.
Right? So what is that kind of
and I do
philosophy?
Think, I think the way it's so much easier now is that storytelling is such a big piece of what we should all be thinking about when we are designing these events, and doing those things and communicating them is a perfect opportunity to tell that story. So while maybe in the back end you're cost cutting and you're finding ways to get creative and be sustainable or not, tell that story, and then everyone can own that feeling that they've made these great decisions and they understand why, like you said, Courtney, the why, have the whole group understand that versus just you trying to manage the budget and figure things out on the back end.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also like to tag that when I talk with clients about it is tell them the impact at the end.
Yeah.
A lot of times we send out a post-event survey, which is great. Post-event surveys are great. We need the data. We should get as much as we can. But then also send some sort of like post-event report. So when I talk about sustainability, I say, send your post-event impact report to the attendee. Tell them these are the things we were able to implement. And because you chose to participate, we were able to do X, Y, Z. Like try to get them engaged in because they picked the vegetarian option at dinner. This is what we were able to save from a carbon, water, what have you, right? You can kind of continue that story and really get them on board. And I think that helps you build as you go forward. So food and beverage is, even from a sustainability standpoint, food and beverage is a place you can do so much, right? And so really trying to engage through all these issues you're currently seeing, you can put things like that into a post-event report and send it out to the attendee and talk with them about how they're helping make an impact and,
Exactly. And if you are donating food after the fact, which you should be doing, and that also saying, hey, we also, with the food that I don't want to say over ordered, but any leftover food that we did have, we sent and we fed 5 families, right? Or something like that. And for companies that are looking at CSR, corporate social responsibility, and ESGs now is the new term, right? That's just a win-win right there on going ahead and adding that and showing your stakeholders that you've done that aspect as well.
Yeah, I think that was something that came up several times during site. And then in fact, Courtney, you spoke to quite a few times about, I think food donation is maybe one of the most misunderstood areas now because there have been changes in that area. And so I think it's important for people to realize their options.
Yeah, 100%. They're the new law, and Tracy, you may know it off the top of your head, but they made an update to the Good Samaritan law.
So Donation Improvement Act. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. It helps provide clarity around what was already essentially covered in the Good Samaritan Act. So for anyone out there who says, I tried it and my venue says that they can't for legal reasons, the answer is they don't have a legal reason to stand on. Yeah, go for it. Tell them they have to.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I gave some links the other day in my course at Exhibitor. I mean, because it's I call BS on it, right? And go out and if they still say it, go out and find your partner in whatever city you're in and find somebody that will come and reclaim the food. That company can actually charge a small amount for the cost of coming to get it. But it provides liability protection, and nobody's ever been sued for it. So in the first place, since 1990. So go ahead and do it. I call BS.
Yes. Put it in your RFP as a requirement. Put it in your contract as a requirement. Go as far as you possibly can with it up front and early so that you can get it done. Because it should happen at every event. I mean, our ultimate goal should be no food waste whatsoever because we planned so well.
Right.
But in the interim, we should be rescuing all.
Right. Yep. I need to send you the link from, I think it was last week when I talked to Simon from the UK at Why Boston Resorts. They have zero food waste. They've created a people's pantry on site so that their employees can actually take the food home with them. That's anything that's been prepared and unserved. They have the ability to take it home. But then they have this super duper composter that will compost breakfast by 1:00 in the afternoon. And they're putting that compost on the trees that they're planting that were planted in response to you and I not having our rooms cleaned on a daily basis. So every time we say, hey, it is. And I'll send you the link. It was really cool what they're doing. So
love it.
Love it. All right. So continuing with the food, with the waste and so Natalie, I want to hear about what's happening on the South Island with disposable coffee cups.
Well, I should preface, New Zealand as a whole country has been doing sustainability amazingly for many years now. And obviously, because of the size of the country, they realize it's a necessity and not just kind of a nice to have. So it's really impressive for me from the outside to watch some of the progressive things they've been able to do in all areas. Some of the new convention centers that have come online or are about to come online, the advanced technologies they're using, and you talk about waste disposal. I just throw out one of the new convention centers in Christchurch. They've got I'm going to forget what the actual machine is called, but it dehumidifies. It takes the moisture out of the waste and turns it into nutrient dense material, because about 80% of waste is water. And so they're able to then use that and put it and grow from that as well. So it's pretty amazing. But I was most recently, I've been hearing about some of the movement about getting rid of disposable coffee cups, because to your point, I think we talked about earlier, the biggest waste involved in creamers and coffee cups. And in South Island, in Queenstown and Wanaka, I focus on them specifically right now just for the sake of the story, but they realized that, and they knew they needed to make a change and find ways to get rid of these coffee cups. And so they started a program where it's lend a borrow program for coffee cups. And at first it started with, one cafe, 2 cafes, but there was always resistance and, this is never going to work. What if I walk down the street and I've got this cup? So the buy-in amongst this town with all the different different establishments owning this idea, they now have multiple cafes throughout the town that buy into this, so that you truly can pick up a coffee mug at one cafe, use it throughout the day, be down the street somewhere else and be able to dispose of it there. And then they all share the inventory throughout each other. And it's become a huge movement. And the messaging that I just took away from it was that you can make these changes, and they seem small changes. They seem like they're not going to make a big impact. But once you start getting others to buy into it, you can make a giant change. There's even the ski field in Queenstown, Cadrona, did very similarly. And they were met with all kinds of resistance to it about what if someone takes a cup from the top of the ski hill and they are down at the bottom? How do we get the mugs back up to the resort? Well, they were able to find partners that are able to now transport every day, go through and collect all the glassware and from the bottom of the ski hill and take it back up. And they're able to do it through different partnerships. So they just didn't take no for an answer, and they kept pushing and finding new ways to do things. And it's just really amazing to actually see that it can happen. Because I think sometimes some of us I get a little cynical thinking, oh, it's never going to work. People always talk about it, but it's never going to happen. But you watch these different groups doing it, and now both of those areas are almost completely free of disposable coffee cups, which is pretty amazing.
So just pretend this is like my mug from Courtney's place, right? And so like a social, not network, but a social area of town, right? Like, and drinking it in the evening, but using it in the morning, I can take my cup of coffee that's in a hard mug, and I'm walking down the street, and now I'm going to just drop it off at Natalie's, and Natalie's going to clean it and bring it back to Courtney. Or
more that there's actually a third party, I believe, that kind of organizes the inventory, and so making sure that every group has the allotted amount. There are different programs in place where some of them you actually, when you're paying for your coffee, you put a deposit down on the cup, and then when you go to turn it in at the end of the day, you get your deposit back. Or you might choose to just buy the cup in general, and that's your cup, and you have it forever. So like a lot of the residences, people that live there, they own their own mugs, and they just come and go. But for a lot of tourists that come and go, they can, and the amount for deposit varies at different places, but you can, and they haven't had, I think, there's always probably going to be people that question the process, but then once it starts generating and you tell the story of why it's important, and they really have owned this as a message for why it's important for the destination. I mean, the regeneration that needs to happen in those areas, and because of the country being so small, they have to put this in the forefront. And it's when you give people that story, they can't deny, that, they're not going to fight to have a paper cup.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So I love it I love everything, every single thing about it. I think it's the most amazing thing. But it's like it reinforces, I often kind of joke just to get people to kind of listen and peek in and say, yeah, that's true. But I say it often that sustainability is a team sport. And no single person, no single company, no single idea is ever going to resolve all that we need to resolve. We really all need to come together and find solutions that are going to work on a larger scale. We don't have to solve every single problem, but if we can start to chip away at a few of the big pieces of the puzzle, that impact is huge. And this is such a cool example of how big that impact becomes. Like, I just absolutely love it.
And I like Queenstown has a really great destination plan that showcases all the efforts that they're doing. I mean, and all throughout New Zealand, there's a lot of ways you can look at that. But it's funny because it's a life. It's almost like dieting, where it becomes a lifestyle if you keep talking. Because I heard this story as I was drinking out of my disposable cup, and immediately went. And since then, I now have my reusable cup. And for the first time recently, I actually took it to a Santa Monica coffee shop, and I said, "Can you fill up my cup instead of giving me?" And it was a funny, like I was almost shy to ask. Like I was afraid that they were going to wonder about the hygiene of it all, and is it appropriate for me to ask? But I did it, and he took it and filled it up with coffee. And I thought, that's one step at a time. Yeah. I can do it too.
Yeah. Well, and this is a Starbucks cup, but you do get 10 cents off if you bring your own cup in for Starbucks, no matter what kind of drink that you buy. I think you have to take your own lid off, and give them that cup.
Yes.
And then for the hygiene purposes, because they don't want to touch the straw and, where, this little lip, where's the camera, the little lip thing, right? They don't want to touch that. But yeah, so and even Lidl, is it Lidl that you pay 25 cents to get your cart? You're renting your cart while you go through the store, and then when you put your cart back, you get your 25 cents back. So I like the idea of that rent. And even it reminds me, this is crazy, but Cracker Barrel, if you go into a Cracker Barrel, you can actually rent a book on tape and drop it off at another Cracker Barrel wherever you are in the country. And when it's like $25, it's like $30 or whatever. But when you return it, you get $27 back on your card. So it's really doing what Cracker Barrel has done for decades with books on tape.
Yeah.
So I love that. Yeah. Yeah. And actually had the different logo on it. You know exactly where to get it back. Right.
Good point. Well, and these ones were, I think, a third-party company that creates them, and kind of that's part of the organization, and so but they have no problem getting them back. But you could also do it that way as well, I believe. But we have, we've moved away from providing like water bottles as giveaways and things, and we recently have looked into just hard mug, to-go mugs that you can take with you around. I shouldn't say to-go, but they're not. So this is a nice hard mug that I'm holding here that has a great top on it, and it's wonderful. But we found ones that actually will collapse. They're like the silicone. So they collapse. They become really small. You can like hook them onto your backpack, and then they pop out when you want to use them. So there are lots of options.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Yeah, because taking that home, I carried a longboard home yesterday from Louisville. I'm like, that was like way tall, right? But yeah, I would love a collapsible skateboard. Like I would do that, but a collapsible cup, because it does take up a lot of space in your wherever you are, and one that can easily fit into or attach to a bag is really important. But I also love the fact of that story, Natalie, is that whoever came up with the company to do that for them, that's ingenious. So think about all the new companies that are being developed to help solve these sustainability practices, which then are employing other people in different areas. They're, these young kids that are coming out of college that want to save the world. These are, who maybe they are one of the 24-year-olds that just graduated from college and came up with this idea. But I love that new businesses are being designed to help solve these problems.
There's one cool example I have, and this was a more recent client did this. They were looking for a fairly zero waste event, like as close to zero as we could get, right? But they still wanted to have branding, and so someone on the team actually found these disposable discs. So they're about that large or so, almost a little bigger than maybe what would fit inside of a shot glass, right? So if you look at a cocktail glass, it doesn't fill up the entire top, but fills up most of it. Completely edible. So they disintegrate after a little bit of time. They'll disintegrate into the drink. They don't change the taste of the drink, but it had a QR code on it, so you could scan it and get all the sponsor information that they wanted to communicate. And gone was the 10,000, count order for the custom cocktail napkin that all get thrown away at the end. Right?
Right. Exactly.
Really kind of cool and interesting, innovative, different. One was put on every drink ordered, except probably, I would guess they didn't go into a bottle of beer. Yeah, I don't remember how they were serving beer, but it's a totally different. People are fascinated. What is this? How does this work? What do I do with it? What am I going to find out?
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. Are you going to play a game? Is there a contest? Is there what can you do with that?
Right.
From an experience standpoint, still do some branding, messaging, etc. It was really cool. It's the first time that I'd seen that used. And I really liked, again, that innovation of what can we do instead? I love this time in the world, because I think there's a lot of innovation going on across the board on what can we do instead that can be better. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And even like the ice cubes too. Like I think there's a company I don't know if you can put the QR code in the ice cubes, but I definitely know you can put make your logo into an ice cube and put that in there. So that helps with your branding of a sponsor.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So Courtney, one of the things that I thought was interesting finding balance in this, right? Because we're talking about all these different ways to do it. And when I introduced you, you said ease, and I'm like, and people are like, sustainability. Wah! So where do you, and it's not just, hey, yes, you're going to spend a lot of money on food and beverage, but there is a balance because there's transportation, there's food and beverage, there's audiovisual, there's cleaning, there's all these things that, how do you figure out where to balance those things out?
So are you asking from like the broader scope of like the media as a whole, like you look at your program as a whole? So on some levels, and so if I were talking with a group of planners right now that said, how do I assess and where can I find the easy things to start? And they're let's call this the middle of the planning year, right? For the most part, they're too far along in 2023 to potentially create big impact, depending on how their budgets are set, who their stakeholders are, what have you. And so I would talk to that group and say, first and foremost, kind of give yourself a little bit of a pass in the immediate and really start to think about how you design for 24 and beyond. So step back and really go through an entire design thinking process of how can we change what we're doing? What can we identify? What can we start to implement? Whether that's low-hanging fruit, whether that's some bigger concepts, and then pick one or two of those things and identify how you can implement them at every single event for your 2024 year. When you stop and do it in that way, it actually helps change how you plan. So you stop that process of just like trying something last minute, and it lets you identify a way to build into the program. So we've been building our programs for years, and we just never stop and rethink them. And this really helps, and especially for sustainability because it's so overwhelming. From the food and beverage standpoint specifically, I tell people at a minimum, start auditing every single meal. Spend the rest of this year auditing your meals. You are going to find out so much information. It'll blow your mind. And then immediately pick up with, here's what's going to a food rescue, and here's how I can change what I'm serving at my meals. If you're already a little further along, I talk a lot about plate size. Nobody needs the giant size dinner plates that we use anymore, especially if you're at a buffet. Move down to a smaller plate size. You're not gonna serve as much food. You'll end up saving a little bit of money. And then I also like the idea of being more plant forward. So I know we talked a little bit about it when picking like a plated meal, but I think you can also do it generally on your buffets, is just be more plant forward or picking items that have a lower carbon footprint and a lower water footprint, and make those kind of the centerpieces of your meals, and then have smaller portion sizes and smaller amounts of maybe some of those other pieces that some of your attendees absolutely have to have. Somebody in your group absolutely has to have beef. Okay, that's fine. Smaller portion sizes, smaller amounts set out, not the main part of what your meal is going to be set up for. Those are some of my kind of quick, easier sort of go-tos.
Yes. Well, and something that I saw a group do or talked about recently too, to your point, if there is about using the same ingredient multiple days, even so, or being flexible. So one of the hotels the group was really important for them to offer selection on site of the entree. But then they agreed that the next following days, they could be flexible in what the menu featured, because then the hotel was able to use whatever piece of the puzzle that didn't get used in that night on the buffets in the following days. So maybe there was like cauliflower the first night and then a cauliflower hummus on the buffet the next day or whatever it was. So they could kind of not waste that food that had been over-ordered for the meal.
Yeah, because they had much. I love it.
Exactly. Last year at an event, I ordered beet tartare, right? So it was little cups of beet, right? And I love beets. It didn't go over too well. But in the back of the house, they had, which is unfortunate. And like in the back of the house, they had platters of them in the little cups. And I'm like, well, can you just dump all those into, and they were time and temperature controlled. Can you dump those into a big bowl and let's have a beet? Oh no, we can't do that. I'm like, why not? Right. And we did have it set up to go to food, to get picked up for charity, but they didn't even do that. I'm like, why aren't you thinking about that? Because it's also the other way of in the kitchen, like you're scraping the carrots, you're cutting the celery butts off. That should all go in a freezer bag and be used to make stock, and I say freezer bag because that's what I do at home. But doing it that way so that it's being used a different way. And
it's hotel I was at, they talked about this. They used, I think beets, I think was one of them, and spinach. And the next morning for the breakfast, they had a pancake person, and they were mixing and making like spinach infused pancakes and beet infused pancakes. And so they were really pretty too. They were like gorgeous and how innovative. It was kind of a new, like, everyone's can do a pancake station, but now, and you got an Instagrammable moment because it looks cool.
Yeah, your pancakes are now red.
Yeah.
Right? Just like make that your and beets are real. If you cook them the right way, they've got the sugar. Because I know there was 2 chefs that I worked with in Atlanta that used beets instead of sugar in their chocolate cake. Right? So if you roast the beets long enough, they caramelize and they get that sugar. And so that's the replacement. So putting those in a pancake and then it's a really kind of fun, cool red pancake. Right? Yeah. And if you have a sponsor that's got red in their logo, how perfect, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So I asked you both a question before we came together, is that what are your favorite food and drinks? And Natalie, I loved your answer because you said you're a situational eater, which I love, but it also wreaks havoc sometimes on meeting planners ordering food.
Absolutely. Yep. I can never make a decision.
But what is your favorite food and beverage?
Well, I have a hard time picking because I love food in general, but I always make me think pizza, because I could eat pizza, I think, for every meal, every iteration of it. I love a breakfast pizza, smoked salmon pizza. I love every different town's version of pizza. So holy pizza. And beverage, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc.
Okay.
It's a good one. Tracy, I have to admit, Natalie knows because I gushed for like 20 minutes one time when we spoke on the phone. I'm like obsessed with New Zealand. I mean, just absolutely obsessed. So she's like, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. I'm like, the only Sauvignon Blanc I drink. So I wholeheartedly agree with that one. That's a great.
Okay. All right. So what about you? Besides that wine, anything else?
Yeah, I'm part Italian, so I am a big Italian food fan. It's really hard for me to say no to pasta, in almost all forms, pretty much. So yeah, that's probably my favorite food. I'm a big water drinker. When it comes to other beverages, I drink water constantly. I am a sucker for a good sweet tea. I live in the South in the US, so a good sweet tea. I love hot tea. I love a flat white if you can get it from New Zealand, because that's where they make them the best. Sorry, Australia. And then I love a really good gin martini too. That's like my go-to for just like a real enjoyable evening.
So have you tried, only for the fact that she's a friend of mine, Conniption Gin? It's out of North Carolina.
I don't know that.
Yeah, it's a per bottle. Yeah. Yeah, it's Durham Distillery in Durham. Yeah, and Conniption Gin. She's the first female to be inducted into the Gin Guild. So it's women owned as well. Yeah, that's very cool. Melissa's her first name. I'm going to mutilate her last name. Okay, so to end this, because we could talk about this forever. There's so many ways that we could be sustainable and talk about food and beverage, but combining all of those questions together, what does a safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experience look like to you?
I mean, I'd probably go with, if we're thinking about all of those things, like kind of all at once, and we need one sort of consolidated answer, I would say focus on portion, like really look at your portion sizes, and what those portions are. I think that's a great place to begin that process and go through that journey.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I might have, the word thoughtful comes to mind, of just really, really thinking and addressing and knowing you can't do all of it. And so focusing in on what the important priorities are and addressing those pieces and try and be as proactive as possible about it. And yeah, you're not going to be able to accomplish what everybody wants, but there are ways to be very thoughtful about it.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, and thinking about those as a whole is hard to really think, so you could take them apart and figure out, what does safety mean to you? What does sustainability mean to you? And do it one step at a time, because it's a lot. It's a little bit overwhelming. It can be. Yeah. So, well, thank you both so much. I'm going to put up here how everybody connect with you, Courtney, it's via LinkedIn. So here's Courtney's LinkedIn account if you want to reach out to her. So leave that up for a second. And then Natalie there on LinkedIn as well. I'm glad we have the short little versions of our LinkedIn profiles. So thank you both so much for what you do and in sustainability and food and beverage. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tracy, for what you do.
Yeah. And actually on that note, I saw two women who took my class on Saturday, and they're like, Tracy, we have, over the last 2.5 days, we're looking at food and beverage so differently, and they've become fast friends. They didn't know each other before. And just talking about food and beverage differently from their different perspectives was just really heartwarming to think that little 3.5 hour conversation with them made change. Right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you both again. And I don't know when I'm going to see you both, but we need to see each other soon.
I'm sure soon there'll be something.
I know. Hopefully soon.
Yeah. Hopefully, yeah.
Hopefully soon. Exactly. So everybody, I'm here every single Wednesday with Eating at a Meeting podcast, talking to experts like Courtney and Natalie on food and beverage. We've got a great lineup of guests for you. So until then, stay safe and eat well.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.